Morning.
Morning. How's everything going?
Great. Sorry, I'm just entering late. I just got my enrollment this Friday,
Well,
and
good.
so I'm trying to catching up on everything. The course so far it's pretty interesting, actually. I'm really enjoying it. All
I'm
the readings,
glad to hear
yes,
that.
a lot of information actually. But I know that when you're talking about regulations, compliance, there's a lot of reading that you need to do to catch up. So, but I'm really enjoying it.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit today, and I'll send out an update later on just around some of the product codes, in thinking about this upcoming assignment that's not due until week 5, but you'll be building on that for all the rest of the work that we'll be doing in terms of assignments for the course. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I've got a list of product codes that I'll send out that you guys should think about, selecting something from. And mostly it's just, be aware that, this is an assignment, sort of thinking about, device description and indications for use, and, people get started on that probably this week. So
Great.
any big questions?
Sorry for that.
No.
I'm at home and there's some construction going on. Yeah.
Any
Where are
questions
you
coming up?
located?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm in Northern California, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only person outside the US.
We've got a couple, actually.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm located in Tijuana, next to the San Diego border.
okay.
Yes, very close to the UCSD to university.
Well, we're
But yeah,
glad to have you in the class.
yes. Thank you. I think this is my last model, but all the other previous trainings are being awesome so far. But
Good.
yes, I just read the, well, not read, I just saw your videos, the 4 videos that you
Mhm.
posted. I don't have any questions. I want to read more into the guidance documents that you were using, like at a more detailed level. But so far, I don't have any questions. It just was a refresher for me of the concepts
Okay.
about the intended use and the indications for use. Now I have like a more clear idea, right? That the indications for use is like the general or the overview of the product, like basically what does the product is going to be used for, and the intended use and the indications for use. It's like basically the steps that the person, the patient, or the clinician needs to be following in order for the product to function properly. But yeah, so far I don't
So
have any questions.
so yeah, so there are and then you can get down into instructions for use. So like that last sort of description strikes me as more, something that you would see in terms of your instructions for use, in terms of the detailed, information that a patient or physician is going to need for using the product. But absolutely, the intended use is sort of that broader, sort of category of like what this product is and what it does. And then the indications for use is the more narrow, tailored subset of that broader intended use that is actually applicable for, let's say, this particular product or this set of instructions, for use. And there are some scenarios like to think about, for this, for instance. So um, you can have a intended use for, um, let's say, providing support for a patient with renal failure. Okay, so just to give you an example from sort of my, direct background, this is the same broad intended use across different products that might be intended for use more specifically in terms of their indications for an in-center acute patient, maybe an in-center chronic patient. That's a different setting in terms of whether you're in the ICU or whether you're, let's say in a longer, term, more outpatient kind of facility. So there are a lot of, don't know if you had a chance to watch John Oliver's, sort of anyway, his video on some of this, but he had, lambasts the, dialysis, providers to some extent. But it's important to know, like, patients oftentimes they'll be there for several hours and then they're out. That's not in a in-center like intensive care setting. It's just an outpatient kind of a dialysis facility. So you can have those two situations, and sometimes the indications for use are going to be then a little bit more tailored to one setting or the other, or in some cases to maybe home use, or home use overnight while a patient is sleeping, which is even a higher risk kind of a scenario. So that's an example where your broad intended use is the same in terms of the treatment you're trying to provide somebody, but then your tailored indications for use could be a little bit more granular in these different either settings or patient populations, et cetera. So you might have the same intended use but be indicated for a specific narrower patient population because of something that they have that's unique, versus maybe the broader category of patients who are eligible for this. And, in some cases, you'll find this as well for adult versus pediatric use. That would be a difference in the indications for use statement, whether a device is intended to be used in that, specific subpopulation. That usually falls into more the indications for use kind of a context, even if your intended use is sort of broadly the same for pediatric and for adult patients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And then, yeah, and it seems like you're the only one who's made it on. I don't know, people have work and it's the middle of the morning. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm trying to hold these generally on Thursday, but I'll send out a note and see what people think in terms of their availability. I did the first one on a Saturday and had, one person who was able to make it that morning. Did last week. We had several people on for last week's office hours. That also fell on a holiday, so I know a number of people were sort of generally off of, work and other things, on that day, which might have made it easier for them to actually attend. But trying to figure out when, because the whole goal of office hours is really for you guys, and to give you an opportunity if there are questions, if there are issues that I can address to help bring clarity or clarifications, really sort of give you an extra resource to be able to leverage as you're going through the course. And also if you've got specific questions, we can go through that. I don't know I don't know what you're doing in terms of your regular work. Are you applying any of this sort of in your day-to-day, or are you planning on that? I mean, how do you intend to use some of the information that you're getting, sort of more broadly from the program that you're
Yes.
you're
Actually, right now I'm actively working. My last job or my professional pathway is focused on quality systems, quality management systems, and I've been working quality systems like 5, 6 years ago. But where I'm located right here in the border in Tijuana. And right here, it's a lot of medical device companies. We have Stryker, we have Medtronic, we have Corsa Medical, what else? Fisher and Paykel. There's a lot of companies that have their manufacturing sites in Mexico. You could say
Yep.
it's cheaper, I don't know. But we have a lot of medical device industries. And one thing that I noticed in my country is that most of the regulatory affairs professionals are either consultants or are working in the corporate offices in the States, right? But no one in Mexico, or there are like very few people in Mexico, in my country, that knows about regulatory affairs. In Mexico, the Mexican FDA, it's called COFEPRIS, which is basically a copy paste of all the federal code, right? But there's a gap that I noticed in my country, that we don't have any regulatory affairs professionals in here even though we have a lot of work like medical device manufacturing. So that's an opportunity that I see in here. And that's the reason that I pursuing this certification. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I believe this is my last module. I already took the design controls, the quality management systems, this one about regulatory submissions. I don't have any like a professional experience in regulatory at first, but I would like to transition from quality assurance, quality systems for regulatory affairs. And that's the reason why I took these trainings, like how to elaborate a submission, like all the paperwork that you need to give to the governments and all that stuff.
Yep.
I know how to do it in my country, like to submit all the paperwork for COFEPRIS, like you need to have the specifications, the procedures, all that stuff, the certifications, blah, blah, blah. But I would like to also expand my knowledge and get all the information about the FDA. I know like the basics, like, all the videos and all the webinars, the annual trainings or the annual conference that the FDA provides. Like I believe it's on May, but I would like to get more knowledge about regulatory affairs overall applied for United States. And hopefully in the future, like try to apply for any works outside my country, or even like provide support right here in my country, but all the knowledge that I know it's we lack in here, because like I mentioned, everything it's like either at a USA corporate or used through a consultant, which is normally in the States. But practically no one in here knows how to work all of these pathways and all the communications. I remember that I believe it was in my previous model that I took from this training. The instructor was awesome too. It's called Jennifer Tudor.
Yes.
I believe
Yeah, she's
I'm
very good.
Yeah, she's awesome. I'm like a fan of her. She's like my goal.
Well, she
She's
used to do a
awesome.
lot of travel actually down to Tijuana.
Yes,
I don't know if you're
I
familiar.
know. I follow her on LinkedIn, and I like to keep contact with her. As an instructor, she's awesome. She's awesome. I learned a lot from her. And I remember that she provide a lot of like hints or tips, like how to communicate with the FDA about the pre-sub program. So I like to absorb as much as I can. And
Yep.
I really enjoy it. I like it, really, to be honest with you. I like a lot of
Yeah.
reading, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That's good. No, yeah, I used to work with actually a number of regulatory and quality folks based in Mexico. So for one of the previous leadership roles I held, I had responsibility for Latin America. And
Okay.
so I had a regulatory affairs person based actually in Mexico City. And then we also had manufacturing that happened in Reynosa.
Okay.
So not, so further, I mean, more on the Texas border. Um,
Tamaulipas, right? Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. So it's like again, it's like Tijuana. It's like right across the border. So,
Okay.
a number of years ago, people would, go down. They would stay on the U.S. side in Texas, and then they would, go in across the border every day, to go visit the manufacturing facility there, and do that whole like I don't know if you're familiar with people doing this, in and over to whatever manufacturing facilities in Tijuana, for instance. So that, definitely have some experience there, but also like if you're working in a large global company, oftentimes there are opportunities to end up, supporting the, sort of global teams that are doing
Mhm.
registrations. And if they're aware that you have some of that background and that training, there might be some avenues forward there because, um, one of the things that I was, doing when I was in that kind of a position was actually trying to train up one of our specialists. She was based in Colombia, not in Mexico, but
Okay.
trying to train her up to help with U.S. and other global submissions beyond just sort of the regional submissions that she was overseeing at the time. She would manage submissions for both Colombia and Ecuador and a couple other countries, and oftentimes you see the same thing for people who are based in Mexico. where, maybe they're managing primarily, submissions within their country, especially if they're at a manufacturing facility. So there's a lot of, quality documentation and things that are needed for registrations in other countries. And, so you're getting a lot of this as well as doing local registrations sometimes. You're also getting all the paperwork together so people in other countries can do their registrations. But having that experience and that exposure and trying to like put yourself into positions where, you're interacting with a very global team, that can be really valuable for, giving you the opportunity to maybe expand into, into more of the regulatory space in terms of global registrations. But you're right, a lot of those global teams are based, either in Europe or in the U.S. or other places in the world. So it can be challenging, but you want to find. If I were you, I mean, my advice would be to find a global company that has a team like that, and then you just want to let them know that you exist and that you can help them.
Yeah.
And as you help people and as you show people what it is that you can do for them, you just open a lot of doors for yourself. And
Definitely.
anyway, so yeah, so hopefully that all goes well as you try to transition from more the quality side of things to regulatory. But in general as well, I'm of the opinion that a lot of the regulatory work is going to start getting eroded. I mean, we're seeing some of this happen in other industries, but a lot of what the regulatory people do, at least at a lower level within the organization, is really work that can be automated with some of the systems that we have now. With some of the large language models and other AI machine learning technologies that are being implemented. A lot of this can just start being systematized a little bit more easily than it could be historically, where you needed a group of people to sort of manage that. And now we're seeing this start to get more and more automated. So my advice is not just to, sort of focus on those things that you can do within regulatory, but really focus on those things within regulatory that will um, make you more irreplaceable, right?
Mhm.
So you want to think about how to build relationships. You want to think about how to get experience that's not typical, and it's not something that can just be um, automated, right? You want to focus your time and attention on those things that aren't going to get automated away. And my advice to you as well is try to figure out wherever you can automate something, figure out how to automate it. And then that means you're not doing it. And if it can be automated by you or within the company you're working in, it'll get automated by other people too. And so you want to, as quickly as possible, stop doing the things that can be automated and figure out how to automate them so that you can focus on those areas within the business, within regulatory, that are going to be harder to replace, as we see a lot of disruption with what some of these automated systems can do.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all the
Yeah.
advice. Definitely we'll have it in mind.
I don't know, for what it's worth, but it's like, and don't be anxious about that. We've had a number of these kinds of changes happen over time, and there's some of this that can happen on the quality side too, but there's a lot more job security, I would say, in quality operations, probably, um, because we're just simply going to need more people in that space. And so if you've got both of those skill sets, you're going to make yourself very invaluable to any organization that you're working within, because finding people within quality who actually have a good grasp of regulatory, it's difficult. It's difficult to find. And so while at the same time, what we tend to see in a lot of companies is that the people who are in quality roles, they rise to more senior leadership because they tend to have a larger group of people who are reporting into them. And so they build the people skills and the leadership skills more readily on the quality side of things, usually, than on the regulatory side of things. Because on the regulatory side of things, typically the teams that you're working with are smaller. And I fell into an interesting sweet spot where I got to transition from leading a medium-sized regulatory team to leading a very large quality and regulatory team. But most of the people in that organization were quality-focused people. And so just as you're figuring out your sort of career advancement, don't underestimate the value of the work that you're doing in quality and the experience you have there, because that can help translate to sort of if you're looking to get into more senior leadership roles, that can translate to having more opportunity on that side of things. So it depends on what you want to make of it. It depends on what you want to do in your career. I don't know, but
Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, and for example, at my last job, I used to make like all the submissions to COFEPRIS, like the Mexican FDA. And for example, I received like equipment validations,
isn't
or
FDA
I
the U.S. COFEPRIS? I mean, it's fun. No, no, sorry. You're doing it
I
the other
just
way, but
call it like that way, it's like a copy paste. And
but
to
anyway,
be
sorry.
honest, I think like it's a little bit more like strict than the FDA, because they
Yeah,
have like tons of requirements. Sometimes like very hard to comply. In 2021, they just make an update to the Mexican regulation, apply for medical device manufacturing, which has like a ton of new requirements, very specific. So you have to write a lot of exemptions or whatever, depending on the
yeah,
type of product you're manufacturing. But yeah, the part that you mentioned, that it will help me or any other professionals like doing this type of transitions, like I agree with your comment that you said that it gives you like some of added value, like for you to be like part of the quality process or quality sustaining or whatever. Because right now where I'm in, I try to call it like Mexican regulatory affairs, because I submit all the paperwork to COFEPRIS, like any new products or whatever that the company was trying to put in the market. When I receive, like I make all the medical device dossier, it's called dossier, like all the paperwork. And for example, I ask for equipment validation, right? And I normally try to review everything, not just like accept it and okay, like let's put it into the file and any other document, right? But I remember that I used to review them and I was like, hey, how do you get this conclusion if you mention like at the beginning that whatever or whatever, like at least I know or I can identify if something is wrong, because I already do some equipment validation in the past. So it's harder that, or it would be like not that easy, like some documents like pass, even if they're wrong, right? So it
yep,
gets me like do that both points of views of QA manufacturing, QA process, and also like the revision part, the regulatory part, like. But yeah, it's pretty interesting, definitely. And I read that you used to work for the FDA, right? Like 9 years at the FDA.
yes. I spent 9 years. It was primarily in pre-market review. I spent some time as
Okay,
well in
okay.
the Office of Legislation when some major changes were coming through. I guess I don't know that I should call them major. They were significant, but in some respects, at least in terms of some of the regulatory shifts that happened related to what's called 21st century cures. But yeah, so I'd helped on that side of things as well. But most of that time was in pre-market review. So really taking a look at those submissions that are coming into FDA, assembling a team of people and different experts to review each of those files, and then providing written feedback to those companies when there was additional, information that we were going to need to make a decision. So that kind of a thing. So did that for a number of years. And that was actually my introduction to regulatory. I'd started in medical devices before that, but really, hadn't been in regulatory until I was working at FDA. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's another, consideration. I don't know if Cofepris is hiring, but if you really want to get into regulatory, that's probably where.
Yes, but to be honest, I wouldn't like to work at Coffee Priest.
Yeah.
Like, I had like work, not for them, but I had received like several Coffee Priest audits at the companies that I used to work for. And to be honest, the inspectors are like, I don't know how to say it, but they're not like very open minded, or if the requirement says like you need to have a quality manual or quality policy, right, or whatever, and like you show to them like, okay, here's my quality manual, here's the requirement, just I fulfill them, you can take a look at it or whatever. But they're like, why are you using like blue ink or black ink, for example, at your notes? And that's like, I don't know, that's part of the documentation practices, it's allowed to use blue or blue or black ink, or but they're like very I don't know how to say it, but they're complicated to manage. And I used to talk to them, and the salaries are not like that attractive, to be
Yep.
honest. And
Again,
no,
some of that's on the inspection side of things. It's the
yeah,
same at
maybe.
FDA, by the way. So on the inspection side of things, it's not as attractive. Um, Early on in your career, it's not as bad. Um, Inside the organization versus being like in the inspectional side of things.
Mhm.
And I don't know how it works with COFA but like in the US as well, there are some other considerations around how all of this gets structured and what compensation looks like, where it's oftentimes not as bad as it looks like at first glance. So when you actually figure out like what the total compensation is, oftentimes it's not quite as bad as it looks to be at first glance. And some of that is just so in the US, a lot of people who are doing inspectional work, they're within the public health service,
Mhm.
and that is a specific, more military, focused group. And so the way they do compensation, the way they do salaries, the various like things that they will pay in terms of certain like housing stipends and other kinds of things change the whole dynamic. I know the one guy who is still actually working within the public health service, and his compensation is far better than mine was when I was working in industry. When you actually do the one-to-one comparison. But
Mhm.
if you're just working in the civilian service within the US, it's not as good. And his like on paper, the money he was making was less. But when you actually figure out what all of the benefits he was getting are worth in terms of, the healthcare coverage he was getting, the retirement that he was going to be eligible for, when you figure out the like all of these things and you add it up compared to what my package had been both at FDA and then after leaving, um, the amount of money that a private company would have to pay him for him to get like a comparable compensation was slightly obscene, actually. So whereas whereas for both of us, like he started in just the civilian side of things before all this. And on the civilian side of things, it's okay if you're early on in your career. Otherwise, you're probably being underpaid by, let's say, maybe you might be able to make as much as twice as much later on in your career outside of government.
Yeah.
Um, but he was able to find sort of a path forward, which opened up doors where very few companies would be willing to compensate him, comparably, even though on paper it doesn't look like he was making very much. But you start doing the math on these specific programs and you go, actually, that's not bad. But
Yes.
again, early on, like this is where, like, at least in the US, the government positions tend to pay better for lower skilled people and people who are earlier on in their career. For very high skilled or highly educated people, the compensation is not generally comparable. Like it tends to be much lower. So a lot of people serving in senior leadership who have, who are medical doctors with PhDs and business degrees, they're not, making the salaries that they would make anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so they tend to, be taking a significant pay cut to be doing that work, that they're doing in more senior, kinds of positions, or
Okay.
people who are just more educated, generally are having that kind of a hit. Now at FDA, they have compensated a little bit for this, where for some people, if you have a medical degree, they can increase your compensation. And so it offsets a little bit of that difference, but they're still underpaid versus what they would be making if they were in private practice or if they
Yeah.
were doing something else with a private company, generally.
Okay.
But anyway.
Pretty similar right here. Okay, David. We have like 20 more
Yeah, we have
minutes.
like 20 more minutes. So
Yeah.
what would you like to talk through that would be useful for you, either as you're thinking about the class? I mean, I've got a little exercise we can go through, but mostly want to understand if there's a specific set of questions or a specific issue that maybe you're dealing with or that you anticipate dealing with. I mean, we can talk through that, and I can, walk you through, maybe even like, how you would, find the information that you're looking for at FDA, et cetera. And I can pull up Orca One, which I have here, and we can do some searches. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I believe that we're going to see this information like maybe on future weeks. But basically, or my ultimate goal about the course is like learn like the ABC of how to write in all the annex, all the paperwork, all the, yeah, basically all the documents that I need to include when I make a submission to the FDA, and like where do I can see like the order of the paperwork, like how to present to them.
Yeah.
That would be like my ultimate, or the goal that I'm trying to reach in here.
So one thing that we're going to be spending a lot of time with, and I'm going to go over here. Here, we'll go ahead and share my screen. Share. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have the E-Star program. And so you'll find the most recent versions of each of these here, right? So if you're looking for an in vitro diagnostic template, you'll grab it here. If you're looking for a pre-submission E-Star, that's going to be here, right? So then we'll go ahead and download it. And we'll save that over here. And then we'll go ahead and pull up that document. And you have to open that in Adobe or another reader. Okay, so here we've got an E-Star, electronic submission template and resource here. Okay, and this is going to be for the pre-submission. So this is an upcoming assignment, but it's a good place to start in terms of some of the information that we'll have to include in this. So here you can see what are you requesting or submitting. So we're going to do, let's call it a request for written feedback, okay? And we'll call it a pre-sub for written feedback, and then it should generate this. It'll be a new application. And then down here, then you'll enter your information. You can attach a cover letter, and I'll give you a high-level template that you can use for this like cover letter, okay?
Okay.
And then you'll have your name, your email, your company name, and you could have this could be different. So keep in mind the applicant or sponsor, if I'm submitting it on their behalf, which sometimes I do, sometimes it's just submitted by them and I help them put it together. But usually I'm, like for a pre-submission, usually I'm the correspondent or consultant. So then you would add the correspondent or consultant here, and the company would be, would be this information, and then my information would show up here as the correspondent, right? And then, are there related prior submissions? I'm going to say no. Do the provided questions pertain to your marketing submission that's under active review? No. Do the provided questions relate to your... So this would be like if it's basically a submission issue meeting. So I'm going to say no, it's not a submission issue meeting. Standards, I'm going to leave that off. And then here, ABC medical device company would like to obtain clarification from FDA regarding, I don't know, biocompatibility questions or something.
Okay. So for this type of request, for the FDA, like I'm guessing that you need to have like your 3, 4, or 5 like specific questions, right?
So the
Like be
way I
prepared,
typically,
basically.
I don't typically even use this template, but this template is helpful. And at some point it might be mandated to use this template, to have a framework for how to put this together, right? So usually what I do is I'll come back to this. So this is sort of a placeholder, but I don't necessarily have the questions exactly formulated yet. But
Okay.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and say, what type of submission do I plan to submit in the future? I'm going to say it's a 510K, right? Because we're planning on doing a pre-submission and then a 510K as part of the course assignments. Okay, so the final assignment is going to be a 510K, submission. Okay. And then we can select up to a maximum of 4 topic areas. And I'm going to say, okay, it's biocompatibility. What's typical is you might have biocompatibility. Let's say there's going to be benchtop performance testing. Maybe you'd ask questions about a clinical study in the same one. Usually for a clinical study, you'd ask that separately. Maybe there's an animal study. So we'll select 4 categories. This would be a pretty overloaded submission. More likely we'll be asking about, let me see.
And these types of meetings can be like in person or remote, like either way.
They can be. So FDA is starting to do more in-person meetings again. The challenge with the FDA in-person meetings is a lot of staff are not actually even showing up in person. I was just talking with one of my old bosses who had been at FDA and is now consulting and helping companies, and he was frustrated that the review staff mostly didn't even bother to show up for the one meeting that they went in person for. So,
Oh my God.
yeah. Anyway, so he was anyway, he was commenting on this, but
And is there a fee that you need to pay for the FDA for this type of meetings?
no.
I'm
So
guessing no.
so no, for these meetings, they're it's a free submission to
Okay.
FDA. But if you travel there in person, there's a cost,
Yeah.
associated with that. And if you're bringing anybody who's not a U.S. citizen to the meeting, you have to do certain paperwork at least 10 business days in advance to make sure that they can get approved to be on site at the government building. Otherwise, they'll have to call in from the lobby, and that's happened
Oh,
at some meetings, where they won't even let them in the building if they haven't gone through all the paperwork in advance. So anyway, so let's say, regulatory strategy and testing, maybe an animal study and biocompatibility, right, is what we have in mind to talk with FDA about. And then, you know, ABC medical device, I don't know, model number. This is optional. I typically just leave it unless you have a specific model number. I'm going to say neither. The product is not an IVD. Is the product life supporting or life sustaining? No. I'm going to say yes, there are, or I mean, maybe no. Maybe it's just software product. Is it software? Yes. So if it's software, then, you know, biocompatibility, animal, and animal would be, you know, not needed. And let's say you're going to do software firmware, right? So we'll change this and say regarding performance testing questions, right? So maybe there's no biocompatibility at all because it's a software product, right? And generally here, like, you wouldn't have benchtop performance testing unless you have a physical product. So, but anyway. And let's say yes. So please check the attributes. Let's say that it has none of the above. Just simplify your life in terms of this. Is it packaged as sterile? I'm going to say no. Product is single use. Or let's say it's a reusable multi-patient use. I don't know. Or I don't know. Depending, like software, these are not exactly like the most applicable for software. But let's say other.
Okay.
Is it a request for designation? I'm going to say no, because that would be a totally different submission. Is the product electrical powered? So if you don't have a physical device, right? So like, let's say that we're talking about software as a medical device. For this one, you would basically say, no, the device is not electrical, right? Which is interesting because it works on electrical components, but if it's just the software interface, those are not relevant sorts of questions to be addressed within any kind of a submission, right?
Okay. That's a little bit tricky. Like at first I would think like, yes, it's an electronic with batteries or something. But yeah, that's right. Because you're only talking about the software, like a program.
Now, if you have the hardware as part of it, then you say, yes, it's battery powered only, or it's both. Like in the case of an iPhone, if you turn it into a medical device, then it'd be, yes, it is battery and mains powered, right? You can plug it in and charge the battery. Anyway, so it'd be both. But in this case, I would say no. So it's an interesting thing. And this is one of the things I don't like about this pre-sub template is it has all this extraneous stuff in it that's not actually relevant to getting to the bottom of, asking your questions and getting in front of FDA. But check the attributes that are applicable. I'm going to leave them all unchecked. System kit components, no. So then you want a comprehensive product description and principles of operation, right? So this is where you want to ensure that you include. So for this upcoming assignment that we have, you're going to be putting together a device description or a product description, and you want to specify, some of this detail that's going to be requested. And I went through in some of the lectures what it all is that you would expect to see in a device description. So I'll revisit that a little bit with some email correspondence that I'll send out to everybody here soon. But just for your awareness, that's one thing to be aware of. So this is where your device description would go. And when we get to the pre-submission phase of our assignments, you just drop that in here, right? That'll be your device description, right? And then you'll also have any further description here of the indications for use. So that's another thing that you'll be pulling together in this assignment that's due in 2 weeks is you'll be putting together a description of your device uses / proposed indications for use here, right? And then you'll want to select the types of uses. So, generally it's going to be prescription use. There might be situations where you'd be over-the-counter use, or it could be both. There are some software products as well. So keep in mind, there might be software functions that your product does, which aren't even medical devices. And so some of that might be over the counter, but it's not even really over the counter because it's not like those are not regulated, or at least not as closely regulated. They might be under enforcement discretion, et cetera. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well in the next couple of weeks. But that anyway, typically devices will fall under prescription use. It's possible they'll be over-the-counter use, and it's possible you would check both, but usually it's one or the other. Anyway,
depending on the product, right?
Depending on the product. So I'm going to say it's prescription use. It's going to be used by a medical provider. It's a software that a medical provider uses themselves, right? And then you got to pick your medical specialty, your regulation, your product code here, and if there are any other associated product codes.
Okay.
And to get to your product code, and there's a little bit of searching that we can do, and there are some videos where I walked you through how to find your medical specialty and regulation. And I'm going to give you some of this basically up front. You're going to get this information, from me as some options for medical specialties, regulations, and product codes to select for all of this anyway, as part of this device description and indications for use exercise that we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. And then you add a justification for the classification. And then you can provide labeling. And then you can include your specific questions, okay? And so this is where your question might be, does the testing plan we have outlined for our software, or does, here, I'm going to say, does FDA believe or agree? So something like that. So that might be question 1, right? And then you can add questions and all the rest. And then this gives you the option to export and import data if the template version gets updated and for some reason you've started it, but you want to use the new version. You don't generally need to use this export or import, functionality, but that's this template here.
Okay.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what's going on here. So here, I'm going to go ahead and you're welcome to stay on if you wanted. I'm gonna jump over in this meeting into a LinkedIn live and see if there's anything that see if we have any questions sort of more broadly from people. But that wraps it up for UCSD office hours. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out by email. Don't hesitate to ask some more questions or anything. Anyway, and hopefully you're enjoying the course, and hopefully it's been useful information for you thus far.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll continue my reading. I'll continue with my discussions today. I'm getting a lot of emails from the FDA now, so it's pretty interesting. A lot of information going on there. I'll just continue with today's discussion, today's reading, and I'll send you a message over the platform in case that I have any comments or questions.
Perfect.
Thank you
very
David.
much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.